Tonight, you stand on the shore of a quiet coastal village where the sea has carried stories for generations. The tide is rising higher than usual, and the elders say that on nights like this, the Selkies return. You are not here by accident. You came because the fishermen spoke of a sealskin left upon the sand at dusk, resting near the black rocks where the waves curl softly against the shore. In this village, a sealskin is never only a sealskin. It is a promise, a crossing, a story waiting to unfold. The air carries salt and cool mist as you walk the narrow path toward the beach. Lanterns glow behind you in cottage windows, warm and steady. The sea stretches wide ahead, silvered beneath the first rising moon. The elders never tell this tale as a warning. They tell it as a story of return, of a Selkie who sheds her skin beneath the moonlight and walks upon the land for a single night, of longing that moves like the tide, of choices made between sea and shore. And tonight, the tide has brought something back. Down along the waterline, half embraced by the sand and half brushed by the rising sea, rests a dark shape glistening in the dim light. Smooth, heavy, waiting. You step toward it slowly, your breath steady in the cool air. The sealskin lies before you. The waves fold in and withdraw again, each movement patient and certain. Above, the sky deepens into blue, and the first stars appear quietly between drifting clouds. Somewhere beyond the break of the waves, something moves beneath the surface, not with urgency, with intention. The sealskin rests in the sand as though it has been placed there with care. Moonlight settles across its surface in soft silver bands, and the edges curl slightly where the water has reached and withdrawn again. You lower yourself beside it, studying the quiet weight of it against the shore, while the tide advances in gentle intervals. Each wave glides forward with calm assurance, gathering foam before slipping back into the sea. The air carries the steady rhythm of water meeting land, a sound as old as the village behind you, steady enough to settle your breath without thought. You lift your gaze toward the horizon, where the sea stretches outward beneath the widening night sky. The larger moon now hangs clearly above the water, casting a pale path that trembles with every shift of the tide. The smaller moon lingers higher and cooler, balancing the sky in quiet symmetry. The elders always say the Selkies follow the rhythm of the tide rather than the clock, arriving when the sea breathes in and slipping away when it exhales again. You rest your fingers lightly upon the sealskin once more, feeling the supple strength beneath your touch. It is cool from the water and faintly warmed by the sand below, carrying the scent of brine and something deeper that feels steady and ancient. A thin mist begins to rise from the surface of the sea, drifting inward across the shoreline and softening the edges of rock and wave without obscuring them. Farther out, beyond the break of the water, a shape surfaces with quiet certainty. At first, it appears only as a darker line against the shimmer of moonlight, then as a smooth arc between the swells, a movement that belongs naturally to the water itself. You remain still as the figure draws closer, carried forward by the tide's slow insistence. Each swell lifts and lowers the shape in unhurried rhythm until it reaches the shallows where the waves fold into softer foam. There it pauses, half within the water and half rising above it, as though waiting for the shore to welcome it fully. Then, with deliberate calm, it stands. Moonlight settles across her form as she steps from the sea, water falling in quiet streams along her shoulders and down her arms before returning to the shore in silver threads. Her dark hair rests against her back, catching light at its edges, and her gaze moves first to the sealskin upon the sand before lifting toward you. There is recognition in her expression, not surprise or urgency, only the calm acknowledgement of someone who has returned to a place remembered. The tide continues its steady rhythm behind her as you rise slowly to your feet, allowing space between yourself and the sealskin. The village lanterns flicker faintly up the hill, warm and distant against the dark, and the sound of the sea fills the space between you both without interruption. She steps forward with quiet grace, her feet pressing lightly into the sand as the mist gathers gently around her and dissolves again. When she kneels beside the sealskin, her fingers brush its surface with familiarity, the movement carrying a tenderness that feels older than the village itself. The fabric shifts beneath her touch and catches the moonlight more brightly for a moment before settling once more into stillness. You feel no fear in her presence, only a deep and steady calm that mirrors the rhythm of the tide. The wind softens along the shore, and the waves stretch into longer, smoother lines as she lifts her gaze to meet yours with quiet clarity. In her eyes rests the vastness of the sea and the warmth of hearths glowing beyond the path, two worlds balanced within a single glance. The tide continues to rise, the night deepens, and the story begins to unfold beneath the patient watch of the moon. She gathers the sealskin into her arms with careful ease, holding it close without yet wrapping herself within it. For a moment, she stands beside you in silence, the tide continuing its slow ascent behind her, the moonlight resting across the quiet shore. Her voice, when it comes, carries the tone of water moving over smooth stone. It is soft and steady, shaped by distance rather than time. "This village remembers," she says, her gaze drifting toward the lanterns along the path. "And the sea remembers in return." You walk beside her without speaking, guiding her gently toward the narrow path that leads back toward the cottages. The sand shifts beneath your steps, and the mist thins as you move away from the water. Behind you, the tide continues its patient rhythm, reaching farther inland before withdrawing again. The climb from shore to village feels familiar. Stone steps worn by generations rise beneath your boots, and the scent of peat smoke begins to mingle with the salt air. Windows glow softly against the dark, and somewhere in the distance, a door closes with quiet finality as another villager settles in for the night. She moves with calm certainty along the path, neither hurried nor hesitant. The sealskin rests over her arms like a cloak waiting to be claimed. Moonlight follows her easily, silver tracing the edges of her silhouette as you reach the first cottage wall. Inside your own cottage, The hearth still carries warmth from the fire you set earlier. You open the oak door and step aside, allowing her to enter first. The room greets her with gentle light and the scent of burning wood. Shadows stretch along the beams overhead, steady and familiar. She pauses just inside the doorway, her gaze moving slowly across the small table, the woven rugs, the chair nearest the fire. The sealskin remains gathered in her arms, untouched by flame or flaw. The land holds warmth differently than the sea, she says softly, kneeling beside the hearth. The sea carries motion. The land carries stillness. You add another small log to the fire, and sparks rise briefly before settling into steady flame. The warmth spreads outward, touching stone and wood alike. She extends her hands toward it, not too close, only enough to feel its gentle heat against her palms. Her story begins not as a tale of loss, but as one of crossing. There are seasons when the tide draws us farther from shore, she explains, her voice blending with the quiet crackle of the fire, and seasons when it calls us back. The sea is wide, and its depths carry songs older than any hearth. Yet there are nights when the moonlight feels heavier upon the water, and we remember the shape of the land. You sit across from her, the fire casting soft gold against the walls. Outside, the wind brushes lightly against the shutters, and the tide continues its distant rhythm beyond the hill. In the water, she continues, we move without boundary. We travel far beyond what the eye can see. But on land, we feel the weight of breath and step. We feel the warmth of flame. We hear our own voices carried in still air. She looks toward the window for a moment, where faint moonlight filters through the glass. It is not a choice between sea and shore, she says. It is a balance. We come when the tide invites us. We leave when it calls us home. The sealskin rests now across her lap, its dark surface absorbing the firelight in muted sheen. She does not reach for it. She does not turn away from it. It remains simply present, like the sea itself waiting beyond the village. You pour warm broth into 2 small cups and offer one to her. She accepts it with quiet gratitude, holding it between her hands as the steam rises in thin, steady threads. The scent of herbs fills the small space, blending with wood smoke and night air. The elders tell our story as longing, she says gently. Yet longing is only the tide pulling outward before it returns. What leaves also comes back. The fire settles into a steady glow. The cottage grows warmer, the night deeper. Her presence feels neither foreign nor fleeting. It feels like something remembered. Outside, the tide has reached its height. Inside, the hearth holds steady light, and the story continues to unfold in warmth rather than distance. The broth warms her hands before she ever lifts it to her lips. Steam rises in quiet spirals, carrying the scent of thyme and sea salt gathered from the rocks beyond the harbor. She inhales slowly, as though reacquainting herself with the rhythm of air held within walls rather than open sky. The fire settles into a steady glow, casting amber light across the beams overhead. shadows move gently along the stone, shifting with each quiet breath of flame. The sealskin rests across her lap, dark against the gold of the hearthlight, neither demanding nor forgotten. When we swim far from shore, she continues, her voice steady and low, the sea carries us in ways the land cannot. Currents guide us without resistance. The water holds us fully. There is no weight to step through, no ground to press against. She lowers her gaze to the cup in her hands. But there are nights when the sea grows quiet, she says, and in that quiet, we remember stillness. We remember what it is to sit beside warmth and feel the world pause around us. Outside, the wind brushes lightly against the shutters, not sharp, only present. The tide remains distant yet audible, its rhythm softer now that the water has reached its height. Within the cottage, the warmth feels complete and contained. She takes a small sip of broth, and a faint warmth touches her expression. The motion is simple and grounded, a quiet act that feels newly familiar. You watch the way her shoulders ease slightly, as though the memory of flame and cup has settled into her bones once more. The sea does not bind us, she says, nor does the land. We move between them as the tide moves between shore and depth. Her fingers brush lightly against the edge of the sealskin, tracing the curve where water once ran freely. There is no sorrow in the gesture, only understanding. Each crossing is gentle, she adds. Each return carries its own kind of rest. The fire hums softly as a log shifts inward, sparks rising briefly before settling again. The room feels smaller in the best way, close and steady, holding warmth against the deepening night. Beyond the window, the moon climbs higher, its light diffused by thin cloud. The village has grown quiet now. Doors have closed, lamps have dimmed. Only the hearth light and the distant tide remain awake. She sits with the cup resting between her palms, the sealskin across her lap, and the calm of both worlds balanced in her presence. And within the cottage, the story deepens, not through urgency but through stillness shared. The fire settles into a deeper glow as the night moves steadily forward. The broth is finished, the cups resting empty upon the small wooden table. Outside, the tide has begun its slow return toward the sea, pulling gently from the shore in long, unhurried breaths. She rises from her place beside the hearth and steps toward the window, the sealskin gathered loosely in her arms. Moonlight filters through the glass and settles softly along her shoulders. For a moment, she simply stands there, watching the pale path of light stretch across the dark water beyond the hill. The sea is patient, she says quietly. It waits without demand. You join her at the window, standing just close enough to feel the warmth of the room at your back and the cool of night beyond the glass. The village lies still, roofs silvered beneath the moon, chimneys resting after the last curl of smoke has drifted into the sky. The tide continues its gentle retreat. The water does not rush. It does not pull sharply. It slips back into itself with the same calm certainty it carried when it rose. She turns from the window and kneels once more beside the hearth. Carefully, she lays the sealskin upon the wooden floor near the warmth of the fire, not too close to risk the flame, but close enough to feel the steady heat. "There are nights meant for crossing," she says softly, "and there are nights meant for staying." The words settle into the quiet room like embers lowering into ash. You add one final piece of wood to the fire. The flame lifts briefly before returning to its steady rhythm. The cottage feels complete in its warmth, its smallness a comfort rather than a boundary. She lowers herself beside the hearth, not wrapping herself in the sealskin, not reaching for the door. Instead, she rests her hands loosely in her lap, her gaze soft and thoughtful as the firelight reflects gently in her eyes. Outside, the sea continues its quiet conversation with the shore. Inside, the cottage holds stillness. The balance between land and water feels steady tonight, neither pulling nor pressing. The village sleeps, the tide withdraws, and the hearth glows with patient warmth. Her voice comes once more, softer now, nearly blending with the low hum of flame. "Return is not always departure," she says. "Sometimes it is simply rest." You sit beside her as the fire dims gradually, the room shifting from gold to amber to faint red. The sealskin rests peacefully near the warmth, untouched, as though it too has chosen stillness for this night. The moon climbs higher above the sea. The tide settles into deeper water. And within the quiet cottage, between the rhythm of flame and the memory of waves, both sea and shore find gentle rest. The fire lowers into a bed of steady embers, each coal holding its own quiet glow. The warmth spreads evenly through the small room, pressing gently against stone and timber alike. Outside, the wind shifts along the edge of the roof, carrying the faintest trace of salt inland before dissolving into the night. She remains seated beside the hearth, her posture relaxed, her presence neither hurried nor uncertain. The sealskin rests near the firelight, its dark surface reflecting a softened sheen as the embers breathe. The room feels balanced in its stillness, as though it has been waiting for this quiet all along. You pour fresh water into a kettle and set it near the embers, not to boil, only to warm. The small sound of metal settling into place blends easily with the crackle of wood. The cottage carries the scent of peat and herbs and the faintest memory of the sea that lingers in her hair. "The sea carries voices," she says after a time, her tone gentle and thoughtful. "Not in words, but in rhythm. When we swim far beyond the rocks, the currents speak through movement alone. We follow that motion without resistance." Her gaze lowers toward the sealskin once more, and her fingers rest lightly along its edge. "But the land speaks differently," she continues. "The land speaks in stillness, in flame that holds its shape, in walls that do not move with the tide." The kettle begins to hum faintly as warmth gathers within it. You pour the heated water into 2 small cups and place dried leaves within, letting them unfurl slowly beneath the rising steam. The scent that lifts between you carries softness rather than sharpness, something grounding and familiar. She accepts the cup with quiet gratitude and cradles it between her palms. The steam curls upward, tracing gentle lines that dissolve into the dim air above. Outside, the tide has drawn farther back now, leaving the rocks exposed once more along the shoreline. The rhythm of the sea feels more distant from within the cottage, yet it remains present beneath the silence, a low and steady undercurrent. When we return to the shore, she says softly, we do not abandon the sea. We carry it within us. The salt remains in our skin. The movement remains in our breath. She closes her eyes for a moment, listening not to the water, but to the quiet within the room. The fire shifts gently as a small ember settles deeper into ash. The wooden beams above hold their steady shape. And when we return to the sea, she adds, we carry the warmth of the land with us, the memory of flame, the weight of earth beneath our feet. The cottage feels smaller now, in the most comforting way. The night has deepened fully, and the world beyond the walls rests without interruption. No footsteps pass the door. No voices drift through the air. Only the steady breath of wind and the softened retreat of waves. You draw a woven blanket from the back of the chair and place it gently around her shoulders. She does not startle at the touch. Instead, she inclines her head slightly in thanks, the gesture calm and assured. The sealskin remains near the hearth, warmed but untouched. It no longer feels like a choice, waiting to be made. It feels like a presence accepted. The kettle cools slowly on the stone. The embers dim further, glowing red rather than gold. Outside, the tide has completed its retreat for this hour, settling into the deeper dark of open water. The moon stands high above the horizon now, its path across the sea narrower and more distant. She opens her eyes again and looks toward the hearth, watching the last steady light within it. There are nights, she says, her voice nearly blending with the quiet air, when crossing is not required. The words rest easily in the room. You lean back into the chair beside the fire, allowing your own breathing to match the slow cadence of embers settling into ash. The warmth presses gently against your skin. The quiet expands without emptiness. The cottage holds both worlds within it tonight. Sea carried in memory, land carried in stillness. No departure is needed. No tide must be followed. The night rests as it is, and beside the hearth, between the softened glow of dying embers and the distant murmur of the sea, the Selkie and the shore share a gentle, unhurried peace.